Hi everyone, life frequently brings you unexpected, and sure enough, that surprise did occur that evening. The house seemed odd to me. My sister was quietly in her room, and I was confined in my tiny space as well. Attempting to focus on an incomplete "The Clock Struck" is a book about midnight and night. Appeared to thicken, but merely the sound of through the window, the wind blowing abruptly. There was a knock on the door. Disrupting the silence, I was a little shocked, but then reminded myself that my sister might require something and hurried out as the door opened. And my brother-in-law was standing in front of me. Who was the powerful one standing unsteadily? The scent of alcohol immediately entered my smell, the faint light coming from the corridor. A peculiar smile was shining on his face. It was obvious that he gave me his eyes briefly went out of focus due to intoxication. "Wife, I really miss you," he said. I froze at the words before I could reacting. He hurried ahead. His awkward arms around me, and I'm Lily, and I was raised in a contented family in the serene countryside where each day started with the birds chirping in the expansive green. My folks were simply farmers in the fields. They have always cherished and shielded me with all of their hearts, but when I became 18, the adult milestone also meant I needed to abandon my family in order to seek my schooling. At that trip to university wasn't just a significant pivotal moment in my life, but in addition to the start of tales that I never anticipated that I would relocate to the city. I spent my time at my sister's residence. John was married to her sister, and the two of them resided in a charming little flat in the heart of the city. When I first came, I couldn't resist being shocked by how quickly life moves here. The city differed greatly from my hometown, through the congested roads to the tall skyscrapers, but when I came to see that city life was not. It's odd that individuals are still employed, putting forth a lot of effort. The only distinction is that they operate in cozy offices rather than exposed to rain and sunlight, as in my sister and brother-in-law live in the country. Are so gracious on the day I arrive. They greeted me with joy and brightness. I smiled, feeling incredibly fortunate that my sister had a considerate husband who was always cherished and looked after her. At the beginning, during my time here, I always thought that nice things would be stable for me, would keep coming, but I didn't realize that everything was only getting started when I initially got there. My brother-in-law and sister maintained a particular distance at all times when displaying love in front of me, maybe because they realized that I had recently arrived from the country and was not comfortable with city life, so they desired to make me feel at ease. But after many years of cohabitation, they started to feel more at ease, and the two's close movements turned into becoming more comfortable and less bashful. At initially, it was only a gentle touch or a smile, but then the kisses and hugs, many of them, were no longer concealed between them. Moments when I unexpectedly noticed them being loving, but had to turn away, acting as though nothing is there, although one time, I felt ashamed on the inside. Spent the weekend with my brother-in-law, and both of their sisters-in-law were at home because they were exempt from going to work since I had a meeting with some new acquaintances I made at the university, and everyone went visit the library for research and evaluation. Before I left, I said them farewell. And seeing them seated side by side in the conversing and watching TV in the living room, appearing really calm during the study session, went by swiftly in the afternoon. Came home and went into the living room, and abruptly came to a halt in front of my sitting. There were the sister and brother-in-law, holding each other tightly on the couch. My brother-in-law gave me a gentle pat. She rested her head on her sister's hair. Not only that, but I also caught his shoulder. The two of them sharing a tender kiss. I was humiliated at the time, and I stood there unsure of what to do, for attempting to remain composed while listening to my footsteps. Both of them turned to gaze at my sister, grinned a little out of the blue. Slyly, "Oh, you're back, Lily." The brother-in-law grinned as well while studying in a group fun. I gave an uneasy nod. Scorching while avoiding their gaze, I swiftly said, "Yes, it's okay to see." My sister laughed at your perplexed expression. My face is crimson. What's wrong with me? I was perplexed and unsure of what to say. Thus I teased and tried to be natural. "Back, I believe you two are as well. It's so loving that I feel ashamed." Learning of the brother-in-law's explosion, out giggling as the sister covered her mouth, and both of them laughed. Appeared ecstatic as she teasingly responded to John, "And I'm simply in love." Typically, there was nothing to be ashamed of. I could only wryly. I smiled, feeling as though I had just slipped into an odd circumstance. All right, after saying that, I went upstairs. Hurried over to my room and shut the door and exhaled a sigh of comfort that my thoughts were still racing on what I had just seen, even though I was aware the fact that they were married and that I still felt great attachment, which was normal. Perhaps embarrassed for whatever reason. Since I had never seen someone convey their emotions so eloquently and amidst the landscape in front of me, my parents seldom ever showed each other affection. And even showed a great deal of restraint with personal statements, so this moment was both. I sat, feeling uncomfortable and new. Distractedly attempting to push on the bed, removing the uneasiness from my heart. After overall, it was fortunate that my siblings cherished one another so intensely that they had always handled me properly and consistently made me feel as though I were a member of their tiny family. And thinking about the city, I told myself that this was something I had to grow used to. Accept the things that are most natural in life, even though it occasionally caused me. I was so ashamed that I had to look for a means to get to my room like right now. Despite what I assured myself, this was typical of my sisters and brothers' affection. It was excellent that they treated each other that way. Each time I witnessed them showing affection and loving, I couldn't resist. I get a weird feeling in my heart. Feeling difficult to identify, maybe it was the sorrow of a small child who had recently left her to live a life of independence. Seeing the family for the first time, how John looked after her, from the little gestures to the kind eyes, I was unable to assistance, but I hoped in private that one day I would also be adored by someone. That those ideas persisted in my thoughts over several days while strolling along the road, or maybe just lying in my room by myself. I questioned, will I ever encounter someone who is capable of giving me a sense of security and genuine affection? There are moments when I picture myself clutching, sharing the small things with someone's hand in life with each other, and I burst out laughing to myself, but that's only what I in my mind. I believed that life with Maya would always be brother and sister. In such a calm manner that a tiny family does not mind, but just enough to keep me toasty. As it happens, there are always surprises in life. Things anyone could have predicted. As the day began, I got up early. Just like any other. After having breakfast with my sister, I proceeded to educate my brother-in-law and sister. Like normal, left home for work as well. Considering their own hectic schedule, a typical day witness what appears to be nothing exceptional. And I concentrated on my lectures in school and friends, but I always waited in my heart until evening to return home and eat my family and I had dinner, because that was when I felt most connected to them. In the evening, when I simply entered my sister was occupied in the kitchen at home. As I was making dinner, I cleansed my face and I got my hands dirty to assist her. Prepared and exchanged brief tales. Occasionally combined with my sister's giggles, has consistently been such a kind, considerate woman who consistently provides for the supper was her family's greatest love. All that was left on the table was my sister. John took a seat and gazed at her. Observed and remarked, "John is late, he has a lot of work and is hard at work once more." To do immediately before the phone rang, she picked up the phone promptly, and it was I heard John calling in his voice. Him declare that he needed to return home late today, with a significant reason, meeting with his boss to sign a contract. She said kindly, "Just go to work, Lily, and I will eat first if that's all right. Remember to eat when you get home late." She sighed and hung up, then looked at me and grinned. "All right, let's eat first." Began our breakfast. My sister appeared to be perhaps a bit quieter than normal, as she wasn't accustomed to having meal without JN, but she made an effort to maintain a cozy atmosphere, periodically getting food for me, and I smiled back when they inquired about education. Attempting to prevent the dish from being overly dull, we cleaned up the area after the lunch dishes with my sister. By this point, appeared to be worn out from a long day. Sat down on the couch and switched on the television. Having comfortably leaned back, I brought, after giving her some warm water, sat down to watch it alongside her, but eventually she turned to face me and gave me a gentle yawn. "I'm going to sit for a while before going to bed." "Long can put you to sleep," I said. Observed her walk into the room and abruptly shut the house's door. Grew quieter, and I sat by myself on the couch. A couple more minutes will pass until the light from the flickering TV screen, but I wasn't longer concentrated on the program. Examining, I made the decision to head to my room. I went inside my room and closed it to finish my schoolwork. retrieved a chair from the entryway and took a seat. The textbooks and notebooks at the desk had been waiting since the morning. For me to carry on working while examining, I sighed and tried to focus on them. Completing my assignments before the deadline the day, but for an odd reason, a sensation seeped into my heart, the tiny sounds coming from outside the corridor. I stopped when it seemed so unusual. Writing and looking up to hear there was an odd silence outside the home, accompanied just by the sound of wind through the window, giving the impression that darkness, the house was even thicker that evening. My sister was oddly silent in her. I was likewise huddled in my tiny room. Space while attempting to focus on an incomplete novel. The clock struck, the darkness appeared to be even at midnight. Just the sound of the wind is thicker. Abruptly blowing through the window, there was a knock on the door, shattering the peaceful setting. I was a little taken aback. But then thought, perhaps my sister urgently needed something. As soon as the door opened, he left. My brother-in-law was in front of me. Standing shakily and smelling strongly of alcohol hit my nose like a ton of bricks, forcing me to unintentionally step back. The weak hallway light shone on his eyes flashed a weird smile. Was blurry, as though he had been intoxicated. Said nothing after staring at me for a while. His voice garbled as he spoke abruptly, "Wi-Fi, I was shocked to see how much I missed you." Realizing what was going on, "John, I'm Lily," I mumbled incoherently. Worried voice, but he didn't seem to hear. He hurried before I could respond. His awkward arms came forward to embrace me. "I love you, so hold on to me, and don't run away," muttered, his voice fading to a whisper. My entire body tensed in horror as it entered my ear. And I was surrounded by confusion, so I tried to struggle, but without success, out of his arms. In his inebriation, my brother-in-law and misunderstanding failed to recognize that the individual, my sister, was not his in front of him. Words and deeds left me totally at a loss. Unable to think of anything to do, but feel choking and powerless. "Wake up, John. I'm not you." I trembled and panicked. I pushed him with my voice hoarse, but he was completely unaware that his eyes were blurry, as if the drink had taken over his. He gazed at me the entire time, but nodded. "I miss you, wife, but I'm at another figure." His voice sounded like it was being choked. Amidst intense discomfort, he let out a sigh. Proceeded, "I want you, I desire you so much that I'm at my breaking point." I comprehended those words when I heard them. They were for her, not for me. The person who never left his heart, even though I knew he was intoxicated. I was unable to halt my heartbeat. Wildly, in part due to panic, in part because it sounded like he was stabbing, I knew, right into my heart, but I couldn't get away, and I couldn't refrain from being carried away, betraying my rationality before his intensity. I was powerless. I'm terrified of myself, terrified of the feelings that were rushing past the limit of control, but after that, I let everything go. He keeps pointing out other people's name as I silently descended into my own. He was still holding me in confusion. His breath was warm, and he was hugging his body. My neck smelled strongly of booze. I couldn't move since I was stiff and didn't know how should I respond to my feelings. We're both alarmed and perplexed, but prior to I could go on to say that we both fell on the cramped area around my tiny bed seemed to diminish, leaving only me and him. And I realized then that all limits his and my relationship had been entirely ruined. The sound of the wind. Beyond the window, the sound of automobiles ringing steadily in the midst of all of the night seemed to disappear, providing the cause of my fast breathing, and I could feel every beat of my heart. All of my reason is being swept away by emotions. Being abandoned by the man I used to thought would always be mine. Now that my sister was here, I was caressing the innermost recesses of my being that I had never considered. How slowly time seemed to pass. Stretching out every second, and I wasn't sure if it was real for a moment. Or perhaps a vague dream. His every move, every touch, every inebriated utterance, seems to engulf me in a tornado of feelings with no escape. I don't recollect how I dozed off, but it slept like a dream because of his warmth and existence surrounding me. As the dim light from the morning came through I heard my sister calling his curtains name. The noise outside the door sounded like a clanging bell beckons me back to reality. I felt when I opened my eyes. Bewildered right away, glancing around, a confused vision appeared in the small room. The bed linens were in front of my eyes. There were rumpled garments all around. John was still lying on the floor. His face appeared exhausted, and he was breathing steadily. But calm. I experienced an unknown fear. All that's rising in my heart occurred last night and returned quickly. Like a slow-motion movie that I was unaware of. I wasn't sure how I was going to handle this. How can I confront my sister's guilt and confusion? I swiftly made adjustments. My clothing, my trembling hands, and my attempt to conceal the evidence of a night that my sister's incident shouldn't have happened. The voice called closer and closer, making my heart race and making me jump. Sat up quickly in an attempt to remain composed, but I was still confused when I turned to Jan. John woke up when I gave him a little shake. Opened his eyes with a dazed expression and wondering what's happening and why you are here. He surveyed the room with confusion, as though attempting to put disparate memories in which neither of us spoke for a while. Seconds, completely confused, I attempted to calm myself, then I spoke more quietly. And your sister is calling outdoors, it was whispered. He glanced at me and hurried to hide beneath the bed. Confusedly, but swiftly did the same. I crouched behind the bed and swiftly I straightened my hair, fixed my attire, and inhaled deeply after sensing that I feigned a yawn since everything was okay. And left the room with a weary my face as the door opened. Standing there, sister's eyes a little irritated as to why you haven't woken up yet. I swallowed. It's almost time for school. Attempting to maintain composure and forcing a smile, I apologize for staying up too late studying last night. I therefore woke up late this morning. Looked briefly at me, but then stopped and just stated, get ready quickly. You'll be late if you don't come out to eat, said, attempting to hide my discomfort. When she turned to enter the kitchen. For a few more seconds, I stood there till I calmed down and then carefully closed the I leaned down as the door returned to the room. And whispered, you're going to leave, she said. John crawled out slowly from the kitchen. His expression remains bewildered. Stood up and gave me a quick glance before unconsciously I apologize, but I'm not sure. He bowed his head. I suddenly remembered what happened last night. A bit too much to drink, and then I prevented him from completing his sentence. It's acceptable to interrupt, we shouldn't speak concerning this too much. The crucial element, are you going to depart now, before she believes anything? Because he gave me a look. Paused for a moment before following his instructions. Stated that every motion was deliberate and slow. In order to avoid creating any noise while he safely descended, I exhaled a sigh of relief. I changed right away and got ready for attempting to produce school materials, everything as typical as possible. Simply afterward, I heard John outside acting as though enter and shout, good loudly. Good morning, dear sister. It's very early today. Emerged from the kitchen and gave him a look. Briefly but didn't display any suspicion. Are you staying at someone else's house? I didn't see you return home last time. At night, he scratched and grinned awkwardly. Yes, I had some job to do, he said. I arrived home late yesterday, so I'm really hungry. After giggling, my sister dragged him to the breakfast table. I hastily left. Making an effort to appear as natural as possible, nothing went wrong, and everything went smoothly. Suspected anything, but deep inside I knew that the word of concern was still present when after breakfast, my sister left. Returning to the room to get ready, I took the chance to whisper to John that you have to be cautious, nobody should be aware of this. He nodded at me, his eyes brimming with guilt. I recognize, and I sincerely apologize. If is there anything I can do to compensate? I'll merely shake my head at you. When he went, I stood without saying anything more. There, observing his figure vanish with a sorrowful heart, I somehow understood that had escaped our grasp, and from at that point, I also realized that regardless of despite our best efforts, our relationship would never again be the same, despite the fact that Jan was aware that what had occurred was incorrect. I didn't dare tell her the truth every time. I saw her radiant smile when I gazed at her. Her affectionate eyes and smile for me and him, my heart ached, and I questioned how I could confront her when I held such a significant secret. A sense of guilt clung to my heart. Like a shadowy darkness that doesn't give me a JN, and a peaceful moment following that evening become quieter when he was close to me as well. We appeared to be both attempting to maintain an undetectable distance to steer clear of any suspicious eyes, something I often consider. I'm not sure why, but every detail at night cannot get it out of my head, and that only causes me to suffer additional nights. I blame myself, JN, and myself for lying alone. Then accuse fate of bringing about this stage, but regardless of how often when I consider it, I still can't find and respond to how I can keep living with this fixation without causing harm to my sibling. Over the next few days, I made an effort to minimize being close to John. I stayed away from avoiding staring into his eyes. Needless discussions. I thought he was doing similarly, and he stopped making jokes naively with me, like in the past. And when together, the three of us sat, the environment we shared was always occasionally. Heaviness makes my sister ponder. Although she had no suspicions, which made me feel even more devastated because I knew I couldn't carry on living this way. I couldn't allow those contradictory feelings to, and I'm consumed by obsessions every day. Thus, after many sleepless nights, I made the decision to. I informed my sister that I was ready to move out. Required a peaceful area to concentrate on at first. She didn't combine working and studying. Concurring that I didn't have to go, because it was convenient to stay at home. And I had someone to look after me. Yet I was adamant about making up all sorts of many arguments to persuade her that I am an adult. I now wish to develop my independence. Stated that in an attempt to conceal my fears, she gazed at me with somewhat concerned eyes. But ultimately consented. If that's your, I believe I honor that, but if there's anything challenging you need to share with me? I nodded and grinned, but my heart was sorrowful. How could I tell? Telling her that my true motivation for leaving was to avoid the transgressions I had made that day. John stood quietly in the corner when I left him of the room, remaining silent while I pulled my bag over to him, and he simply gazed at me, his eyes full with unfathomable feelings. I dared not express. I bowed my head and stared at him for a while. And left when the door opened. Shut behind me. I thought I had just departed from that place, but in addition, I hoped that leaving would allow me to put an end to all the suffering, to regain the tranquility I had lost. I attempted to start a new life after moving out. Life outside the home that included so many complex feelings and recollections that plagued me while I was living in it. It was difficult in the small room, but at least I felt as though I had more room to reflect. Clearly, though, memories of that evening still returned occasionally. I pondered, particularly during quiet moments, whether I had acted appropriately by deciding to remain silent and go, or if I need to have confronted the reality from the starting. But I later discovered that there are secrets that can cause harm if they are revealed. Not just one, but numerous individuals, and I not wish to be the cause of those wounds. JN and I continued to communicate over time. Less we realized how far away required to safeguard what remained of my sister. Continued to call frequently to inquire regarding her life and John's plans for the future and their everyday pleasures. Every time I hear her voice, I share my heart feels heavy and relieved. Understand that she still believes in and loves me as before, and all I can do is attempt to live a decent life. In order to avoid disappointing her. As time passed, I came to acknowledge that there are errors that are unavoidable, but that we may alter ourselves to prevent them from happening again. In order to remember, I have to learn to forgive myself. But in order to proceed, I concentrated on learning, working, and creating an independent life. Throughout time, the suffering and as the shame subsided, the lesson that I still carried the story left behind with me. I learned from my narrative that instances of making poor choices when intoxicated can result in repercussions that we will must bear for the remainder of our life. My error not only had an impact on myself, but also made my relationship with my family vulnerable. Circumstance, it was an excellent lesson on emotional regulation around the limits that must be honored in partnerships as well as accountability I wish to provide for myself and other people. Guidance for all parties involved in any kind of interaction. Always maintain sobriety and value what you don't. Allow fleeting feelings or weaknesses cloud your judgment and cause you to lose important things in the face of errors rather than avoiding them. Figure out how to repair them or take the appropriate action to as best you can, and most essential, learn to forgive yourself. Go forward, but remember the lessons that you've learned from your failures is not always simple, Yet each a challenge is a chance for us to enough to understand how to live a more appropriately and create a better future. Thank you. I appreciate you listening to my story. These shares teach valuable lessons to everyone.